Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. Usually on this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of folk horror, with each new episode being released every Friday. But I wanted to take this opportunity to let you guys hear my chat with filmmakers, writers, actors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of them, these two are definitely ones to watch. They've got 3 movies in their back catalogue. The previous movie that came out a couple of years ago called Spring got huge critical acclaim, and even Guillermo del Toro tweeted about it, saying it was one of the best genre movies he had seen in the last 10 years. Fantastic little movie with a really kind of interesting horror twist on the sort of Richard Linklater Before Sunrise sort of format. But before that, their first feature was a movie called Resolution, a really interesting movie about 2 guys going into a cabin. One of them is trying to get off drugs, sort of cold turkey style, and weird stuff starts to happen. And again, it's a kind of subversion on the cabin in the woods horror movie. And in that tradition, they've now got a new movie called The Endless. The Endless is, although it's not a sequel, it does in some way link to their first feature, Resolution, and involves the story of a sort of commune, a UFO death cult out in the middle of the woods, and 2 brothers, played by Benson and Moorhead, who grew up in this commune, escaped, and are now returning 10 years later. Now, again, I don't want to go into spoilers, but the movie goes in very different, interesting, weird, and wonderful directions, and is not the typical death cult movie that you might expect. So all 3 of their movies are wonderful, clever, subversive takes on genre movies, and The Endless is currently the #1 horror movie of 2018 according to Rotten Tomatoes. So that means it's gotten the most amount of positive reviews from critics, more than any other movie this year, including A Quiet Place, Hereditary, Ghost Stories, and some of those other biggies from this year. So people are absolutely loving it, critics and audiences alike. It's a baffling movie. It's a movie that you're going to want to go away and talk to your friends about in the pub afterwards. So I got to sit down and chat to the directors, Benson and Moorhead. We were given 30 minutes, and because those guys were so nice and because they wanted to keep going, I managed to get an entire hour of chat with them. We talk about the movie, we talk about horror in general, we talk a bit about their favourite horror movies, and towards the end we do go into real spoilerific, nitty-gritty detail about The Endless, in which we discuss the mythology and the real specifics of the story. So this is your warning. For the first sort of 70% of this interview, we try and stay spoiler-free. We do talk about minor plot details, and we talk about some of the kind of overriding themes of the movie, but nothing in depth. But as I say, in that last section, we do go completely spoilerific. So I would recommend going away and watching The Endless before listening to that final section. But here is my chat with the brilliant Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead.
They sent us a video.
Whoever's watching, I just wanted to say the Ascension is something that we've all been looking forward to. We couldn't be happier.
I want to go back.
One day, one night, we come straight back.
Good to see you two. And what the dickens brings you all the way out here?
Just thought we'd visit while you're here.
We're always here.
I used to make a lot of your clothes, you remember that?
They're all in like their 40s. They just look young. It's weird. Why come back now? The video you sent. What video? How is that possible? You want to know what runs all this? You go find it.
Who's next?
Okay, I'm very pleased to be joined by Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. Guys, welcome to the podcast. Hello.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
No, thank you so much for being here in this gorgeous BFI green room that we're in right now. Mirrors on the ceiling as well.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we only make eye contact through the mirrors, this is cool.
So, first of all, guys, just to sort of set up for people that haven't seen this movie, could you just give me a little bit of a synopsis of what people are to expect from The Endless?
Yeah, the Endless is about these 2 brothers who the older brother basically pulled the younger brother out of what is presumably, or what he describes as, quote unquote, a UFO death cult about a decade prior. And as the movie begins, they have just received a message in the form of a videotape that is from what is presumably, again, a UFO death cult, declaring that, well, number one, they're still alive and around, and the older brother had told the younger brother that they had done the deed a decade prior, but that it seems from the video, even though it's cryptic, that maybe the mass suicide is imminent. And the younger brother says to the older brother, basically, like, what, that was our family, our lives on the outside world are terrible. Why did you pull me out? They're clearly non-threatening. Mm-hmm. Can we at least go back and say goodbye? That was the only family I ever had. And he convinces the older brother to go back for at least a day to at least say goodbye. And very early on, there's a lot of debate over whether it is actually a cult or not.
Yes.
And then as the movie goes on, this gets a bit more complicated.
Tell me, where did the sort of seed of this idea come from? Because obviously it does link to your first feature, Resolution.
Right.
Something that I didn't realise until watching it, until we suddenly got to the sort of crossover point, I suppose. Was this something that you guys always had in mind, even when you were filming Resolution, that you might at some point tell this story?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important, especially that anybody listening that hasn't watched either of them.
Yes.
You don't have to watch either of them to understand the other one. They completely stand on their own, And I'll answer the second part where you say if we had it in mind when we were shooting Resolution. So I have to paint a picture of Justin and Aaron in 2011, shooting Resolution. Our bank accounts were in the double or maybe triple digits maximum. Like, we were broke as hell.
Yeah.
We didn't know when we wrapped Resolution if anyone would give us a job ever again, not just in the film industry, but anywhere. So the idea of making an expanded mythology universe is at the time so arrogant it borders on insane. So we did not think we would be returning to this world at all. But in the years since, Resolution did really well. For what it was, a small release, but people seemed to really get attracted to it. We thought it'd be a polarizing movie where you love it or you hate it, and you're seduced by the myth, or you think that we're just a bunch of quacks. And but weirdly enough, it just did particularly well, and we were able to make a second movie called Spring, also a very hand over fist handmade movie. But we realized as we were talking about this that the mythology still existed outside of ourselves. We had a TV show idea based off of the Resolution cabin, and we had a meta idea of a movie about somebody who went around finding the footage in Resolution all around the world, went all over the world for it. And then we had a sketch comedy in which Aaron and Justin, the cult members from Resolution, were traveling the world trying to find a UFO to pick them up because the cult abandoned them because they thought they were stupid, and that was very unfunny. But and actually, it's on the Blu-ray that was just released.
Brilliant.
And or I'm sorry, not that whole thing, but just a scene from that abandoned project we shot.
Yep.
And we realized, though, this world still exists outside of us, and there's more story to tell that isn't a sequel to Resolution, but there's just another facet of this story. There's something else there, and that's why we decided to revisit specifically that story. So.
I love it because and is there any, again, you may not want to sort of sound arrogant, but are there more plans to expand this even more? I mean, especially in the Endless, there's these little pockets of different characters all in their own stories. Is there a thought to maybe carry on with this?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are no plans right now to do anything specifically, but we still continue talking about TV show ideas and what's the best approach for that, and possibly doing a feature at a bigger scale at some point. But we're talking about like 5 or 6 years down the line,
yeah,
and doing other stuff in the meantime. But what's interesting now is that now that, especially since the Endless has hit digital platforms and we're getting a lot of feedback online on it, it's interesting. Like, someone sent a tweet today that said something like, Please tell me there's a movie about Byron from Resolution tracking down his the French researchers.
Yes.
Okay, here's the crazy thing.
Sounds like such a cool movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, that's a cut scene from The Endless. So it's weird to have like, there's cut material from the stuff we've done, and there's material even from Resolution that we spoke about, but we didn't put on screen, or it's never said out loud. There's lots of like weird little things, and it's weird to like track people's thoughts on it online and have them talk about it and predict it, and them like not know that it sort of already exists, at least in text in a final draft document.
Actually, I just realized what would be so cool is to show that scene around, just because it is actually a scene in which. Okay, so spoiler time. Pause, like fast forward 2 minutes if you're listening to this. For The Endless, there's a scene where Aaron's character stumbles on a man in a tent, and you'll know what I mean.
Yeah.
That scene used to be about 10 pages long, and he didn't stumble upon that man in the tent. He stumbled on Byron's researcher friends who have set up a Lost-esque like little base in which they can predict when an offering is going to come from the entity, and they watch it take form, like a weird natural event. So like alarms go off and like a light starts flashing, and something's about to happen, and they can watch like a prediction form in front of them. But we ultimately decided it was too chatty and academic, and we needed something visceral and terrifying. And we cut it and replaced it with the man in the loop tent, which we're actually really happy with. But I would love to see that other scene as well.
That is amazing.
And, frankly, it was a huge sacrifice for myself because it was cutting 10 pages of dialogue from Aaron and giving them straight to Justin.
I can't believe you did that.
I know. I'm such a selfless person.
I mean, what was it like for you guys, starring in this one as well as writing, directing? How difficult is that? Does it help that you have each other to kind of share roles, in terms of directing and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, it helps that we have each other to direct each other in scenes that the other person's not in. I mean, that's priceless, to have each other to direct each other. And we're not in. There's a lot of scenes we're not in together, so you can just trust the other person. And there is that for sure, but there is also a thing to just generally performing in something that you direct.
Yeah.
That it's this weird thing where it's like, oh, you can just when it's time to do rehearsal, Aaron lives downstairs from me, and we can just be like, hey, every single day, do you want to go rehearse and figure this scene out and like work on it?
Yeah.
That was just fun.
It's just fun.
Yeah.
It's fun, and you're not asking of all the favors you ask for in indie film, at least you're asking for one less. That no matter how much you love acting, you probably don't want to come over to our house every single day. And you know what I mean? Like, truly, no matter how much you love doing something, you don't want to come to me in Aaron's house every single day and work on stuff. And it's fun. It was so fun just to be able to be like, hey, do you want to work on this? And every day we just work on it and get it closer and closer to what we wanted it to be. And when you've spent, we probably spent the majority of our lives, literally the majority of our lives at this point as filmmakers, like doing do-it-yourself films. Mm-hmm. There's something about that's it just makes it particularly fun and gratifying, like working on it. It's like one more part of it becomes one more part of filmmaking that you feel like you're capable of doing and that you get to enjoy doing.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you think you guys are likely to want to do more performing, more acting in your movies?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's listening, just call us up. We'll do anything. Yeah,
fantastic. I find what I love about all of your three movies is they all kind of play with the genre a little bit, I suppose. You could take Resolution as kind of a cabin in the woods movie, but then it isn't. And Spring, again, it's this kind of, a lot of people obviously made comparisons to almost like a horror version of a Linklater movie or something like that. And again, with this one as well, not quite what you expect. It's not just the UFO death cult type scenario, I just wondered, do you guys sort of deliberately subvert expectations in that way? And do you see your movies as horror movies?
Well, I'll answer you in reverse. I definitely see our films as horror movies, but in terms of the genre, and this is something we've said about Spring and with Resolution, is it would be a problem if we started our movie by saying, let's subvert the horror genre, or let's subvert the sci-fi genre, or the cult subgenre, or whatever. Because what it is you then take a set of rules and you either react to them or you try to adhere to them, right? That's by definition, that's what it would be. You don't mean to do that. Nobody wants to like deliberately follow the rules. Everyone thinks of themselves as a rebel, but we just don't even have that conversation. We just say like, what's the story? Who are the characters? And what's the story that flows through them? And the thing that we are drawn towards ends up being something a bit like sci-fi horror, with a strong focus, hopefully, on the characters. And so ultimately, after that, you premiere the movie somewhere. It sells to a distribution company, and the distribution company has a marketing department, and that marketing department then must have the terrible charge of deciding what genre. Right. They have to do it. They have to. That's why people decide to go see movies, because they decide it's like a movie that they want to see.
Yes.
And that's totally okay, by the way. I mean, imagine if there were no genres and you just walk to a video store and they're not even in alphabetical order. Like, you don't want to, like, that's impossible. But no, we don't deliberately decide to subvert anything. Our movies probably are in some ways reactionary, in that we don't want to do what's come before us. So we probably, if we see something and it feels familiar, we'll just go the other way.
Yeah.
But it's not the intention. It's more normally just like, as we're going down the path of making a movie, if we hit this spot where we go, oh, that's right. That's from something else.
Yes, you know? Yes. Are there any movies in particular that you did draw inspiration from? Anything in the genre in particular?
Is this besides Gotti starring John Travolta?
Yes. I haven't seen that yet.
There's It's interesting. I don't think there are any conscious inspirations. I'm sure we have things like seep into everything we do. If you're a filmmaker and you watch films, you're going to have things that influence you, even though you don't know it. But there are...
You know what's a weird one that we never... Oh, sorry. You know what's a weird one we never talk about when we talk about inspiration? Because I haven't seen it since it came out, but I feel like there's a weird element of wrist cutters in there.
I guess there kind of is, yeah.
I haven't seen wrist cutters since it came out, so I don't really know what that is, but I feel like the kind of purgatorial acceptance of every character in there, it's probably in there. But I don't remember what the movie's about, so... Yeah,
it's because I feel like Wrist Cutters is through and through a comedy. But I do think that our humor in our films shares some of the DNA with Wrist Cutters, but if we went full Wrist Cutters, it'd break the tone of our films, because they're obviously... we like to have funny moments and levity, but we're trying not to like end up in the tone that Wrist Cutters is in, which works great for Wrist Cutters. But then, I mean, beyond movie influences, I think that the things that we're more very directly influenced by, that we can look at the work and be like, oh, here's where this came from. It's usually books.
Right.
Oddly enough, Desperation by Stephen King was an inspiration, which is a kind of a Stephen King deep cut. And The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft to like some degree, like a little bit. Everything by Alan Moore, in the sense of like Alan Moore is like so inspired by Lovecraft and everything he does, in the sense of like making the supernatural feel like it's real and it's there and it's somehow connected to the natural world.
Yeah.
And it's too complicated for you to understand, and it's too old for you to understand. It's like all that stuff's there, but it's like basically like most of our Lovecraft inspiration is like via Alan Moore. And House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski.
Oh, you know what's fun? This is one that Justin had already written the script, and I read this book and I said, "Hey, this is really similar. It's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." by Harlan Ellison.
Yeah.
And that's a short that you can read in 20 minutes, but very much like our movie. And but the script had already been written before either of us had been exposed to it. But definitely reading those, we're like, oh, that's similar. We're definitely attracted to the same things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've been talking quite a lot on this podcast recently about folk horror, the sort of subgenre of, classically movies from the 70s, British ones like The Wicker Man and things like that. But a lot of other movies, Kill List even as well, actually sort of takes a lot from folk horror. But this idea of a focus on the landscape and maybe something bubbling up from sort of under the soil as well. And, again, you could draw comparisons to themes in The Endless as having that as well. I mean, do you guys kind of see The Endless in any kind of subgenre of horror, I suppose, if it were to belong to any?
Man, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. Even though it's not intended, it would probably make a pretty good double feature with The Wicker Man, especially if you saw The Wicker Man first.
Yeah.
And it set up this expectation of what's going to happen. So then you go into The Endless and you're like, those dudes are going to end up in a wooden dude getting burned alive.
Yeah, I think that's what I thought when I first saw it. I thought it was going to be an evil cult movie.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
The Wicker Man has one of the best shots of all. The Wicker Man has one of the best shots of all time in it. The last shot of The Wicker Man is genuinely, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, is one of the best shots of all time that no one talks about.
When the head melts off and then you see the sun.
Then you see the sun. What the hell? How did they even do that? And back when there's no digital anything, you can't even do a zoom in post.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that shot is perfect. It's haunting.
Yeah, and the fact that whole sacrifice was to the goddess of the sun, everything about it just works.
Right.
It's so
now,
wonderful.
I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that the thing was silhouetted by the sun, and then when it burnt down, you zoom in on the sun. Like, that's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
But damn, is that a good shot?
Yeah.
And not just a good shot in the way that you get pleased by aesthetically pleasing things, but that shot, you could replace the whole movie with that shot and it works.
It's incredible. Yeah. That movie, I think that movie was the B picture in London of a double bill of that and Don't Look Now. That's what that was.
Wow.
Imagine that double bill.
People compared our second movie, Spring, to Don't Look Now.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Mostly
I suppose
the Italy connection, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested as well in in the way that you portray, I suppose, the idea of the cult in this movie. And again, there's a lot of movies out there about cults that are dangerous or sinister or whatever. And again, this movie kind of deliberately, I suppose, rides that line. I mean, do you see the portrayal of this cult as, are they a dangerous thing?
Are you asking if we're pro-cult?
Yeah, exactly. Well, kind of, because actually, I think the movie, actually these are a nice bunch of people. That's the thing. And actually then it starts to become about, actually, are these brothers, especially the older brother, is he the liar? Is he the manipulator? Is he the cult leader type figure in some ways?
I mean, I think that's actually a really cool observation. In the idea of telling a story about a cult, there are so many, whether it be fictional or documentaries, about a cult being ultimately be like, this is this evil, malevolent thing. Mm-hmm. Whatever. I mean, yes, so if you did go that route, you aren't delivering the unexpected. Mm-hmm. But let's be honest, there are a lot of things that we quote-unquote define as cults that do a lot of awful things.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, there are plenty of things that we also define as cults, spiritual groups that are small, that have a leader, that don't do anything different than what a mainstream religion does. They just have smaller numbers. And that ultimately the only difference, usually the only difference between a cult and a religion is numbers. It's the amount of people in it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think what the Heaven's Gate cult did was virtuous, and at the same time, I wouldn't want to vilify people that are just small spiritual groups. Personally, it's why, that's ridiculous. How is that different from anything else? The spiritual. Now, all of that said, there is a thing where our characters, Justin and Aaron, are placed in this situation. And yes, it's been called a cult. Yes, because of what we chose to focus on in this film, they do at first seem like there's some kind of malice, or they seem kind of creepy, or whatever it is. But at the point where you detect there's actually something otherworldly happening within the story, right? There is oftentimes there might be a split with the audience where it's like the second you see something otherworldly happening, for certain audience members, is like right there. you run and you scream and you're terrified and whatever, and that's what our characters should be doing. But in reality, if you placed actually Aaron or myself in this situation, we would genuinely probably just be fascinated. If you put myself or Aaron in like a haunted house movie, like our actual selves, it would. I think it would really piss off. It would for a certain audience, they'd be like, "Oh my God, yeah, that's exactly how I would react. Why has no one ever done that before?" But it might piss off other people where it's like, "Why aren't they running and screaming?" Because all we would be doing is being like, "Oh my God, there's an afterlife. This is amazing. This is wonderful. This is like great."
Yeah.
And it's something that's in all three of our films where, it's like, yeah, Chris and Mike are like scared in that cabin, but there's also a certain level of fascination, I think, especially from Mike. And in the case of Spring, it's like, yeah, there's, Evan is probably prefer that his new girlfriend isn't a Lovecraftian creature, but like at the same time, it's got to be kind of fascinating. and in the case of The Endless, it's like, like, of course, Justin and Aaron are creeped out by things around them, but they have to simultaneously like totally fascinated and not running and screaming. But like, I feel like there's a part of every audience member that just wants to stay, right, and be like, this is great. There's an afterlife. There's a deity. There's all these things. I don't know.
I'm really interested as well in the way that both this and Resolution, the way that the monster, I suppose, is creating stories with these characters who kind of know that, especially in Resolution, they come to realize they are in a story like they realize they're in a film that you're watching, I suppose. And I suppose what that means is that you kind of, as the viewer, feel like the monster, I suppose. And, it's an interesting, in a conversation about the horror genre as well, I suppose. People say, why is it that we like watching movies where people suffer? Why is it that we like watching horror movies where characters suffer for 2 hours?
Right. Well, I think you can separate stories out into very, very simply into stories with and without conflict. You can talk about a utopian story, and it's really nice. Like I feel like if you are somebody that is born without, then a story about people like eating cakes and loving one another and all of that, that's the only story you want to hear, and they have no trouble whatsoever. It's like once upon a time someone went to heaven and they played musical instruments all the time. And the rest of us need to see a little bit of our own struggle within every story, right? It's an empathetic, the whole idea of being a storyteller is to try to tell a story in which someone can find themselves.
Yes,
that's the whole idea.
Yes,
and whether it's an extraordinarily esoterically strange, fantastic, supernatural story or whatever, the idea is always to try to make sure that the person listening to it feels the same way. It makes sense to them. It's not an alien emotion. And kind of back to Justin's point is like, some people find every emotion in some of our films to be crazy, where it's just like, I would have run and screamed, and I would have immediately got the first plane back home and hidden my couch. That's what I would have done. And but for us, that's what we're trying to do, is explore the supernatural as a subject of interest. And so if you take the idea of a story as being something in which conflict arises, right, and that's the basic principle of drama, right? Then and then you take it a little bit further and you make it into a horror or a sci-fi story. The conflict that we want to make often has to do with the conflict about a person butting up against the thing that they have never seen before, and that challenges their view of what reality was, right? And I think that's I hope I'm tying together into a cohesive answer on why do we like negative stories so much? Because that's where our stories begin all the time. Is what happens when your view of reality is completely challenged, like reality completely breaks in front of you. And then, but normally our films, at least, because we're optimistic people, they build back up into us reacting in a way that isn't nihilistic. And where our stories always end with just, well, ultimately it's two people, and the connection between two people is important. And as long as that connection can be strong and positive, then the supernatural doesn't even matter, right?
Yes.
And that's because that's what we believe. It's not just an arbitrary stroke of the pen. It's us expressing ourselves as people through our movies.
Wonderful. And, the thing is about as well, people, especially people like myself or critics or academics or whoever, they love to look at the horror genre historically, genre movies in general, I suppose, as to, is this to do with what was happening at the time in the real world or whatever it might be? And, you often wonder, do filmmakers actually mean to do that? Do they mean to reflect maybe what's going on in the real world or whatever? Take Get Out last year, for example, and that seemed like a quite overt, reference to maybe what was happening in America or race or whatever at the time. And I just wonder, do you guys have any thoughts like that when you do genre movies, or are they pure escapism? Are you is there anything else about what's going on in your lives, what's going on in the world in America when you create these stories?
It's actually something we talk about quite a bit. Our movies certainly aren't pure escapism. They're meant to have, hopefully, when any human being watches them, whether you're a nihilist, you're an optimist, whatever it is you are, that hopefully you leave the movie and hopefully you talk about the movie with a person that you love. Yeah. Genuinely, that's like what we're trying to do. We respect stuff, like Taken or something like that. It's like a solid 3-star thriller.
Yeah, absolutely.
You watch it and then you're done with it. You don't talk about it probably ever again. That stuff's great, but we try to make films that, again, you leave it with someone you love and you keep talking about with someone you love. Now, that said, we decided very early on in our careers to not chase like a cultural zeitgeist or any kind of like raw nerve of anything, because I think you'll always be late if you chase it.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? If you chase it, you'll you'll always be late. But what we do try to do is, and here this is going to sound really pretentious, but it is genuinely the intention is that we do try to explore universal human themes in our films. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, if you've done that, the themes that are tried and true, that have been explored, throughout, since cave paintings and Greek myth and Shakespeare and whatever, that you've been like these human themes of, like, in our case, a lot of times it's conformity, anti-conformity. When is it appropriate to rebel? And what is that theme within a relationship between two people, whether it's a friendship, a romance, or siblings. Mm-hmm. We try to not chase the cultural raw nerve, but maybe it's because we're not good at that, or maybe it's just because we're just like, oh, we'll always be late.
I think you're right, though. That's a fair point. There's a risk of getting very dated very quickly, I suppose, isn't there?
It takes, like, we got into a film festival and got distributed about as fast as a film can make. Yeah. And so we wrote the film 2 years ago. More than 2 years ago. So I feel like we'd be like dropping like "turn down for what" in the script, and like everyone would be like, "Yeah, okay, that's a really,"
yes.
But that said, though, we had this interesting thing. Actually, this happened at our BFI screening last year, where we started realizing that people were taking the universal, timeless themes of the script, and they were applying them to things that were
happening right now.
Yeah, happening right now. So people asked us, like, "Is your movie about Trump?" Like, and we're just like, "What are you?" But no, not at all.
I think we all want every horror movie to be about Trump, basically.
Of course. And people have asked us, "Is your movie about our organized religion? Is your movie about your own family dynamics?" Mm-hmm. And none of that is false, and none of that is why we set out to make the movie. Yeah, we're not going to say, if you look at the movie and you feel like there's a reflection on organized religion in a way that's affected your life, I hope we've made you think about it, and maybe not in a bad way. I grew up with organized religion, and I don't view it as a negative thing. And so that's the thing, is like, there are timeless themes that are worthy of exploration that will always filter down into the nowadays.
Yeah. I've got to ask you, this is a horror podcast. What's your favorite horror movie?
Oh, Jesus.
And why?
Oh, how dare you? What is mine?
Jurassic Park.
Oh, I love Jurassic Park.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Jurassic
I love
Park.
Jurassic Park.
Is, and actually truly terrifying at points as well.
Well, can I give you a long Jurassic Park answer? Please do. When I was growing up, I was too young to see Jurassic Park in theaters. My parents were like, "Sorry, that's too scary for you," and so I had to watch it on video and had a wonderful time. I was not too scared, but I loved it. And here's what's really funny, like, being horror filmmakers, and exploring whatever. And people say, if we're just meeting someone new and they say, what do you do? Oh, I'm a horror filmmaker. And people will very politely be like, I'm sorry, I just don't like horror movies. I don't like horror movies. And I'm always like, asshole, I'll bet your favorite movie is Jurassic Park. That is the scariest movie. That is a creature feature through and through. Everybody's favorite movie is like Jaws, a movie about a giant shark.
Yes.
And Jurassic Park, a movie about crazy reincarnated dinosaurs. Like it is the most genre of all genre films. Is everybody's favorite movie. And it's like, hey, if you like Jaws, if you like Jurassic Park, and movies like those, you like horror movies.
Yeah.
You just maybe don't like slashers or something.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's a small subgenre. You can not like whatever you don't like. But everybody likes Jurassic Park. And so if you tell me you don't like horror movies, you are lying.
Have you seen Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom yet?
Yes, I have.
Yes. And moving on. Go on. What's yours?
I'm going to cheat. When I think about like my two favorite horror films are probably The Exorcist, which is a poster on the wall right there. It's really
amazing.
The Exorcist and Kill List by Ben Wheatley.
Oh yeah.
But that said, one of the best horror films I've seen recently that not a lot of people talk about is a Dark Song.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's wonderful. Yeah, Dark Song is probably one of it's like a really creepy, scary film.
Yeah.
And it takes a really interesting choice of like modernizing Aleister Crowley.
Yes.
And then as we were talking on this conversation, I remembered one that I know that people won't define it this way. But to me, Space Odyssey 2001 is actually one of the scariest films I've ever seen.
There is something very unnerving about it.
Really scary movie. Yeah. But it's funny though, because there's a point in the Space Odyssey 2001 where, from some people's point of view, the movie should just end and the pilot should be like, F that, I'm going back. Too scared.
Exactly.
It's like, I'm turning the ship around.
No thanks.
But he never turns that ship around. He keeps going and it gets creepier and creepier and creepier.
I'll throw out another one that we like. Obviously we like movies that people don't consider horror films that totally are, and they're just being uppity about it. No Country for Old Men is a horror film.
Oh my god, absolutely. Do you know what interesting?
It's an incredible slasher.
The best slasher film of all time. And by the way, there's no arguing it. It is a slasher.
Of course
film.
it is. Of
It
course
it is straight up a slasher film. It's a guy who drives around with a fucking cow killer thing, shoots people in the brain, and goes around.
And what you like are the kill scenes.
Yeah.
Like the boot scrapes on the ground and and actually,
it's
so
terrifying.
We have a friend. I can tell this story, right? The exec that had a meeting with him. Okay. So we have a friend who was an industry exec at the time, and it was really interesting. They came in to pitch, for financing No Country for Old Men. And they came in. They did I don't think they did a lengthy pitch. I don't think they did that, but they kind of did. They did it, and everyone looks at him, who was maybe a junior exec or something for his thoughts. And he went up and he started giving his thoughts to the Coen brothers about No Country for Old Men. What's wrong with their idea? What's wrong with it? And they just sat there like quietly, just listening and taking it. And then afterwards, he's like, "So what do you think?" And apparently they were just like, "Oh, okay." This is a third-hand story. This might be all lies. I don't know, but they're like, "Okay." So there's two problems with this. One is you think this is a crime story, and this is a ghost story.
Oh, love it.
And the second problem is we aren't asking for your opinion. We just want to know if you want to make it, and if not, we're gonna leave. It's like the most awesome story I've ever heard. And by the way, this was told by the exec who knows he missed out.
Oh, I love it. That is brilliant.
Pretty good, right?
And you're so right. There is a kind of there's a weird snobbiness about the horror genre. I'm so pleased that you guys do consider yourself horror filmmakers, because there's a lot of filmmakers that I've chatted to who are, and yet say, even they say they're not, about certain things. Why is that, do you think? Why is it that we are really tempted to say, oh, Silence of the Lambs is Oscar winning, therefore it's a thriller and not a horror, or No Country for Old Men, or whatever it is? Why is it that if something is somehow this good, it's no longer a horror movie?
I think it might, if I had to guess why, I think that it goes back to that there's several reasons. One of them is the one thing we've never spoken about a whole lot when answering this question is that I think anytime you put a lot of violence into anything, it becomes to some people to be like gallows humor. Like, you know, Titus Andronicus isn't as respected as
Yes,
as
you're
Romeo
so
and
right.
Juliet, right?
Yeah.
Like anytime you start putting a lot of violence into something, there's a long history in storytelling of that being like, well, then it's not as legit as this other thing. Is it literally the presence of a lot of blood, of bodily fluids, where it becomes like, oh, I guess this isn't classy. But it's always been that way. It's not like this just happened in the 80s. It's like,
So a couple of days ago, I watched Halloween, the original Halloween. There's like no blood. There's like no blood in that, and that is the horror film. And when people think of horror films, they think of Jason running around. I'm sorry, did I say Jason? Michael Myers running around with a knife, you know, and stabbing people to death. And by the way, he strangles basically everyone to death in that movie. He doesn't even stab them to death.
Yeah,
which is a bloodless death. It's shocking. I don't. By the way, I don't mean that to like. I just don't know. I don't know the answer.
The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't have that much blood,
Barely
specifically blood either, right?
Barely any. And actually, you only see one person on screen get killed by a chainsaw in this Chainsaw Massacre as well. It's amazing.
Beyond that, but I do think that there is a thing going back again when you look at many of our greatest writers, whether it's Shakespeare or it's Stephen King, the stuff they do that literally just has less blood becomes more critically acclaimed, right? Shawshank Redemption's a whole lot more. Green Mile. These things are a whole lot more critically acclaimed.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder if it's got something to do with having a visceral reaction people just don't like. You know, it's the same with comedy. Kind of has that reputation too. Anything that makes you laugh or jump somehow feels, you know, it.
Well, I think it's the thing. I think that human beings will generally see a reaction to blood or violence as less sophisticated than a reaction to other forms of drama. And again, that goes way back, literally centuries, probably millennia. You could probably look at cave paintings, and like the cave paintings that showed sophisticated drama are like more renowned by Neanderthals than things that are just like a spear going in a mammoth. Yeah. The things where you talk to the woolly mammoth, it's so much better than when you stab it in the eyeballs. Mm-hmm. But I think like the other thing though is that there is a lot of stuff that gets categorized as horror that is purely a business decision of like, if you put the violence, we can create the still shot, put it on the cover, and whatever, and then just like put it out and just put it out there as content, and then we can just sell it. There's been a tradition of that in horror, maybe more so than other genres. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong. There's a lot of bad dramas. There's a lot of bad comedies, obviously. Actually, there's a lot of bad comedies.
Bad comedies are way worse than bad horror, man.
Oh yeah.
There's like watch a bad comedy and you're not laughing once and you're just cringing the whole time. You watch a bad horror and you're at least just like, all right.
Yeah.
You can have a good time with it somehow.
Yeah.
There is probably though a lot of horror that is dramatically a poor film that is all built around like a splatter of something.
Yeah.
And these things exist, and no one involved making them cared about it all that much. It was a cash in, but and I think that's why. And I think that those things, when you like see it, when you're walking through a video store, when you're going through your iTunes or whatever, you look at it and you're like, oh, that thing, haha, giggle, you know, and it just stands out more in your mind than if it's a bad drama or a bad comedy. You just instantly forget it because there's not an axe going through someone's forehead and their brain hanging out. You know, those things are more memorable. So you remember there's all these bad horror films and gets this bad reputation, and thus when awards season comes along, and it's like The Exorcist or 28 Days Later or Silence of the Lambs, these like very critically acclaimed horror films. They are no doubt, these are horror films that sometimes the people involved in marketing those awards campaigns, they'll be like, oh, we can't call it that, because then they'll think it's
put it elsewhere,
this lowbrow thing. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. There's been a lot of articles recently. A lot of people have been talking about, you know, are we at the moment in some sort of golden age of horror? Critically acclaimed horror movies, in which The Endless is a big one, and get included a lot. That you guys make the kind of thinking man horror movies, and you've got obviously Get Out and The Witch and Hereditary, and there's been a lot of horror movies that critics have really got behind in recent years. Do you think that is the opinion has changed, or have the films genuinely, are we going through a bit of a golden age of the genre at the moment? I don't know.
I don't actually know the answer to that. I am a film fan just as much as you are.
Yeah.
And so I'm watching Hereditary and I'm watching Get Out and just having an incredible time.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, I think that those films, if they came out in 1970, would blow everybody's mind.
Yeah.
And The Witch and all of that. So I don't think that's a film that is like a film out of time that only could have existed in 2017 or 18.
Yeah.
They're just good movies.
Yeah.
And I think the good news is I think what's happening is there's a shift in everything. In production, it's getting more affordable and more accessible. Distribution is changing wildly. And so these films that otherwise might not have had a voice, or maybe never would have existed in the first place, are now able to exist in these voices.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's changing even more, because still it's still predominantly like white men.
Yes.
Get Out excluded here. And so like it's changing even more now that we have more and more conversations. More voices are getting into the game.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some crazier, wilder films that actually mean something.
Yes.
And it's okay, by the way. There's tons and tons of films out there that are just for fun. I know we mentioned Taken, but there's plenty of horror films out there that are like, we're making a film that when you watch it, you're going to just have a roller coaster and you're having a good-ass time.
Yeah.
And it's going to end and you'll be like, good times.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's totally okay. And we can talk about those in the same conversation as we talk about films like The Witch and we talk about Get Out. But I think what it is the golden age of horror is talking about the fact that there's just more good movies getting made.
Yes.
Straight up.
Yeah.
There's some great dramas and comedies getting higher and higher quality, and it's because we're getting better voices and better distribution for them and all of that. And it's only going to get better. We're not done yet.
Okay, just a quick interruption here to say that from this point onwards, we are going into full spoilerific details. If you haven't seen The Endless, then be warned. I'm about to ask them specific details about the ending of the movie and about the whole mythology. So, once again, this is your big, fat spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the movie, give yourself a treat, go away, pop on the Blu-ray, watch The Endless, and then continue listening. Well, on that note then, I've got a few questions about The Endless, and I've seen the film 3 times now, and I mainly because I've seen it 3 times, and I've talked a lot about it with different people, and we've been trying to figure out exactly how everything ties together in terms of the time loops, characters' ages, that kind of thing. So I've got some questions, if you don't mind kind of confirming if I'm right or wrong about some of these things. So this is full spoiler territory we're in now. So am I right in thinking that the time loop that the main sort of the Arcadia is stuck in is 10 years long? Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. It's
10
years long.
So is it that just before your characters escaped, there was an ascension?
Just after they escaped.
Just after.
Probably like
just
days after.
Yes,
the ascension happened. 10 years passed, and now they're getting, roughly 10 years has passed, and they're getting there right before the next one.
So how old are your characters? How old are they, in the sort of present day of the film, and how old were they when they escaped then?
It's roughly, we had exact ages, but I'll just put it's roughly like 25 and 30. Yeah.
25 and 30. So you sort of 15 and 20. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And what's the time difference between what we see of your characters in Resolution and The Endless? It's still, I mean, let's call it that one's like probably about 11 years. Like that is, it's like not right before, but it's pretty close before they left. And Justin's getting to that age where like he A, wants answers, and B, a sort of like alphaness is coming out, but in the sense that he'll be willing to sort of lead in his own weird
splinter spirituality within the group.
Okay, and so what about the relationship between Aaron and it's Anna, isn't it? Is the and you know there's the whole conversation about she was weird with you when you were younger. Is she a paedophile? Is she not? Is she a paedophile then? Because what I was trying to work out was
we can't answer that. I mean, what, like, is she really the genuine? I'll tell you the conversations that happened behind the scenes about her character. Her character was always intended to deliver the same emotion that. And by the way, this is a literal, almost direct conversation. Was like the idea was that she would be like, you know, when you're watching Back to the Future, and Michael J. Fox's mom tries to hook up with him. We were literally going for that, where it's like, that's so weird. Do you remember the first time you saw that when you were a kid?
Yes.
We wanted like that emotion in people to help deliver further on this idea of just feeling unnerved in a situation.
Gotcha.
But the weird thing is, like, Justin, the character, he's obviously like unreliable. So like the degree to which she was like into him when he was a little kid, I mean, there's some BS there for sure.
Yes.
But the degree to which she's still into him, if she is in fact into him, and this was a discussion we had in rehearsal with Callie Hernandez. We talked to her about it, and what we ultimately decided on when we were rehearsing the scene in my place was that, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a small gesture in the movie where she, Aaron, give me your hand. She grabs this. She grabs. He needs to see it. Why are you afraid to hold my hand?
Talk it through.
She grabs his hand like that, and then she goes like this, and she goes like that.
Oh, okay.
And it was the idea in that one little tiny gesture was that no matter what you thought had happened between Anna and Aaron in the present day up to that point, that in that gesture was that it's ultimately been maternal, and that no matter how Aaron sees it going forward, the audience should see it in that way, because there's the later when Aaron's like, "Hey, we slept together," and like, it's very unexpected, and it should be unexpected to the audience as well. They're like, well, wait a second, hold on. I thought she was just being like nice to him.
Yes.
Actually, there's a scene that was cut out of the movie, and it's not even in the cut scenes on the Blu-ray because it was just so short and meaningless. But it was of Aaron waking up next to Anna, but both of us were fully clothed, and it was just one of those things where you're like, oh, you guys literally just slept next to each other. It's interesting.
I love it. It's amazing, and I think, you know, me and friends, I maybe just thought too much into it. We talked about it afterwards, and we were going, maybe this means this, and maybe this means this, and I thought maybe the fact that she may have had some sort of feelings for him when he was younger is that this loop has happened before, and she somehow remembers the older Aaron and is reflecting. We got into a big, deep conversation over drinks about what all this could mean, basically. Good. But that's what's so brilliant about this movie. And again, you know, Aaron using the language of we slept together, and okay, that's a very childlike thing. Is he still somehow a child? What's going on? Is he in a, you know? But it's brilliant. You know, you guys give what feels like just enough information not to kind of make us feel completely alienated, I suppose.
I will add to this though.
Yeah, go on.
Is that if I went to Aaron like today and I was like, oh, I just started dating someone, I'm like, yeah, we slept together, and it was and that we literally got to the point where I was like, no, we literally just slept together. That's actually like, that's kind of a bigger deal. That's a big deal. Like,
well, it's very sweet. Yeah,
like you literally like you're like. It's almost like a bigger deal than having sex, depending on, you know.
I'd also be insanely mad at you for just being too literal with me. I'd just be like, what are you talking about? Of course I assumed. Like, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
It's a big deal. Yeah. It's weird she slept with Aaron, literally.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's still a weird Back to the Future mom moment.
Yeah, we totally she shouldn't have done that.
Yeah,
so there's not a lot of new people.
I don't know whether it's sweet
camp.
or disturbing. It's a
Well, I'm happy we all talked about this.
Yeah, I am.
Well, here's the spoiler on it. You know, I mean, we're in spoiler.
We are
now, you know, deep into it. But you know, she's probably in her 50s or 60s. You know, it's just she's been in this time loop for a while. And so for her, she's just seeing a little kid that doesn't really know his left from his right.
Yes.
And this kid needs taking care of.
Yes.
And by the way, 10 years ago, she was still in her 40s or 50s.
Yes.
Same deal.
Okay, so that's going to lead me to my other question. Do they age within the time loop? Do they age?
They age 10 years, and then when it resets, they are back 10 years.
So when we see them in that last shot after after you guys are escaping.
Yes, we've digitally de-aged all of them.
Okay, there they are de-aged at that point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we did. With all of that budget.
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought. I just wanted to check because that was another thing that added that extra layer of what.
I wish
what could
Tim
that
had
mean?
if Tim had no beard, that would have been brilliant. That would have been a stroke of genius. Yeah.
But honestly, I love it. This is what's great about films like this is that me and friends, we've talked about it and theorized. I've read stuff about it. It's great. Honestly, it's wonderful. Sorry. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper.
Let's go deeper. We've got time.
Okay. The only other thing I want to ask about is the characters from Resolution. It's Michael and Chris, isn't it? Their story, where it ends at the end of Resolution. So what happens at that point to them, between them and the Endless? Is it that then their story changes and then they get stuck in this loop?
Right. And okay, again, full spoiler, like it's no longer fun. You don't want it in the mystery box anymore.
Yes.
You want to talk about it with friends. You just want to fucking know.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened was, they asked, can we try it another way? That's the last line of Resolution. And what it did is they were allowed to try it another way, but it still completely destroyed them and then reset their loop. And when it reset, it was Mike and Chris, where Chris had a gun and he says, "Hey, it's your best friend." That's when he entered the loop. And they have been there for a while, and they haven't lost hope that they can still get out. And so there's this line in The Endless where he says, "I feel like, if there's a configuration, there's something we can do, like a life Rubik's Cube, where there's a particular configuration of things we can do where it'll let us out." And that's a blink and you miss it line. But that's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they burn the cabin down. That's why when the loop resets in The Endless, they do this weird theater of like, "Hey, it's your best friend," and they repeat the beginning of Resolution. Like they said they would earlier in the scene. What they're doing is they feel like they've got the beginning right, and they just don't know how to end it.
Right.
And if they could begin it right and end it right, they'll be let out. But they don't know what that is, and there might not be an answer. By the way, though, if you watch our entire filmography, there's an answer, but it's a very, very deep cut.
Oh,
so yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting that scene with Chris and Mike, the way when Justin sees the loop reset and you see them putting on the theater for the deity of like starting the loop over, and Mike saying it's your best friend, all that stuff, that throws people more than like anything in the whole mythology, because the idea is like, if you don't catch that they're putting on theatrics, you think their memories reset.
Yes, are they aware of their loop or not?
And it's something that is weird. It's like, I never would have anticipated that that's like the one thing that throws people so much. But it's weird when you explain it, people are immediately like, "Oh yeah, of course that's what it is." But it's also, it's like literally like there's lines that lead up to it. It doesn't say it out loud exactly, but it does have the life Rubik's Cube thing. And I remember it was interesting, like directing that scene and telling them like, "So you're gonna replay the scene from the beginning of Resolution, but you're doing it as a theater for this thing." And it changed the subtext in their performance of like what they were doing. And it was fascinating to watch when you know this answer precisely, but it is like the one thing that throws people.
Yes, yeah.
I now actually, that it's funny, people ask like, would we change anything about the film? I now realize I wish we'd hammered that home. I wish we'd hammered it home.
No.
Like when he says something like, no, I'm serious. I wish we'd hammered home when he says, the life Rubik's Cube thing is like, yeah, we're going to begin again, and we're just going to do the same thing where I say, like whatever, and we remember it all, but
they do say it.
No, they say it. They say it.
Say in the cabin, they say,
yeah.
They say, "Oh, that thing you always say."
The thing you always say.
Yes,
right.
it's true. Yes, it's true.
They literally talk about.
No, they make a whole thing of it. We just didn't know we needed to hammer it home. Like,
but
hammer it home.
You don't have
and
to.
It's not that people are missing it. It's I'm not blaming the viewer at all. Like, our movie's like full of 1,000 mysteries, and you don't know which one to start tracking. It's fine. It's fine. We understand. But the answer is in there. It's in there. That's the one thing where it's like the mystery can be solved, but you just have to dig and dig and dig, and it's nobody's fault for not digging on the first viewing of a movie. You don't even know what it's going to be.
Love it. Well, guys, I could talk to you all night, but I won't. But thank you so much for joining me.
We're done.
Yeah. I mean, I've already gone about half an hour over the time I was given.
Okay.
But
that was great.
Just is there anything else that you've got coming up that you can talk about yet? Any other projects in the pipeline or any ideas of anything else?
Unfortunately, there's not anything very specific because we're two guys. We're very restless, and we make a whole bunch of projects. So we're definitely going to be back on set soon, shooting something that is similar to what you've seen before.
Great.
Right now, one thing that's kind of fun just to mention, because we're in England, is we're doing a TV show about Aleister Crowley. And that's actually like pretty far along, and it looks pretty cool. We'll show you some stuff after this wraps up.
Yes.
And that is something we've been trying to get off the ground, either as a feature film or a TV show, for a few years, and now it's looking really cool. So we might actually get to see his life story told not like crazy devil worshiper in a pentagram summoning the devil, but like actually a nuanced, interesting Peaky Blinders with black magic kind of thing.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure. And there we have it. A big thank you to the wonderful Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. Such lovely, enthusiastic guys. I think they were actually hoping to talk for even longer, but we were being hurried along by that point, so I wasn't able to get any more time with those guys. I really hope, if you haven't seen The Endless, I mean, first of all, you probably shouldn't have listened to that entire chat, but if you haven't seen The Endless, I'm hoping that chat has made you want to go away and watch it, because it really is worth a watch. And these two guys are incredible talents. They are definitely ones to watch. So get in touch. What were your thoughts on The Endless and on their previous movies, Resolution and Spring? The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. Thank you so much for listening, and we will return on Friday as we continue our folk series. I'll be joined by film critic Larushka Ivanzadeh, and we will be discussing none other than The Wicker Man. So join us then for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.